Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Lufer, the President of the Citizens Research Council. I'd like to welcome you to CRC's webinar to discuss our analysis of Governor Snyder's proposed state budget for fiscal year 2015-16. This webinar is being presented by the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. CRC is a statewide, nonpartisan public affairs research group. This is CRC's 99th year of operation, a longevity we attribute to our promotion of sound public policy for state and local governments through accurate, independent, and objective research. We are a private, not-for-profit entity, and we rely on the charitable contributions of foundations, businesses, and corporations. I'd like to encourage all of you to join our circle of supporters and help us to continue to provide high-quality, independent information on important policy topics in Michigan. Please note we are recording this webinar and we will post it on our webpage where it will be available for future viewing. We have everyone but the presenters on mute, so we will not be able to hear you if you speak. To ask a question, please type the question into the questions pane that should be appearing on your screen in the GoToWebinar software interface. You can type these questions in at any time. If you have any technical questions any technical problems during the webinar, please let us know by calling 517-485-9444. After the webinar, you will be receiving an email soliciting your feedback, and we would very much appreciate any feedback you have. Today's webinar on the state budget will be presented by Bob Snyder, CRC's Director of State Affairs, and Craig Thiel, a Senior Research Associate. Bob has been with CRC for a couple of years now after working for many years with the House Fiscal Agency. And Craig has about 10 years of cumulative time at CRC with an interval away from us. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Bob to get us started.
Thank you, Eric, and welcome to everyone to our annual CRC budget webinar to discuss the governor's budget recommendation released last Wednesday. We're going to start off with a quick outline of what we'll be discussing, and then we'll move on to the substance of our webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about, opening with a quick look at the state revenue picture. We'll see some long-term trends in state revenues, and we'll discuss some recent uncertainties regarding business tax credits that have led to some negative revisions to revenue forecasts. After reviewing the revenue picture, we're going to take a look at the situation facing the governor. Some of the revenue declines in revenue forecasts have led to a short-term budget shortfall, which the governor needed to fix through some fiscal year 2015 budget reductions. Then we'll get into the meat of the governor's fiscal year 2016 proposal, highlighting some of the major changes, and conclude with an assessment of the proposal, looking at some longer-term budget pressures and the long-term outlook for the budget and budget stability. So let's start with a look at the state's revenues and some recent trends in those revenues. We like to start off each webinar with a longer-term view of state revenues, and this chart looks back to the year 2000 at the combined revenue and the state's two major revenue funds, the state general fund, general purpose revenues, and the state school aid fund, which is primarily used for K-12 education. As you see, economic conditions throughout the first decade of the 2000s, bad economic times in Michigan, capped off in the last part of that decade by the Great Recession, had largely stagnant and then greatly shrinking revenues at the onset of the Great Recession. In 2010, overall revenues were 10% below 2000 levels in actual dollar terms, and if you adjust those same revenues for inflation, on the dark blue line on the bottom, real revenues were actually 25% below 2000 levels by fiscal year 2010. Since then, we've had, as you can see, some fairly steady growth in both dollar revenues and inflation-adjusted revenues. Dollar revenues have grown at about 3% per year, slightly beating the inflation rate that we've seen over that time. The key, though, however, is if you look at real inflation-adjusted revenues for the state and these two major revenue funds, in the projections hold in fiscal year 2017, state total combined revenues will still be about 20% down in inflation-adjusted terms using the CPI as our inflation index compared to fiscal year 2000. This next slide takes a look at the individual funds, and it's helpful to look at the two major funds separately. What we see here is inflation-adjusted general fund, general purpose, and school aid fund revenue. And what's clear here is that general fund has taken a much greater hit during these downtimes. If we go from the year 2000 to fiscal year 2010, we'll see in real terms, inflation-adjusted terms, the general fund, general purpose revenues were down slightly more than 40% from their 2000 levels by fiscal year 2010 at kind of the peak of the Great Recession. And still, even in fiscal year 2017, if the projections hold, they'd remain down about 30% in inflation-adjusted terms from those prior levels. School aid fund has also taken hits in inflation-adjusted revenue, but by much less. And as we've seen, and as I think Craig will highlight in some of his comments today, that's led to some expanded use of the school aid fund for purposes that had traditionally been funded with general fund, general purpose revenues. Despite the projected growth in recent years, we've also seen some recent strains in revenues in general fund, general purpose account, which is sort of the key discretionary revenue that makes up much of the state's budget deliberations. And these have come in the form of downgraded revenue projections over the last two revenue consensus conferences. Twice a year, state economists get together and they form consensus on our revenue estimates for the school aid fund and for general fund and general purpose revenues. And this chart tracks general fund forecasts from last January 2014 to this January 2015. And as you see, the top dark blue line is from January 2014, the pink line from May 2014, and then the most recent estimates from January 2015 are in the bottom red line. If you look at 2014 general fund, general purpose revenue, you'll see that basically that line shifts down over the course of the year as forecasts dip. In January 2014, we were estimating about $9.5 billion in general fund, general purpose revenue. By January of 15, that was down to $9 billion. And likewise, if we look at the upcoming fiscal year 2016, whereas we projected, we believed we were going to have $10.5 billion in general fund revenue back a year ago. This most recent January forecast downgrades that to $9.7 billion in general fund, general purpose revenue. There have been a number of reasons for the revenue declines. We've had some dips in income tax projections. Proposal 1 last year passed, and that will lead to some diversion of general fund revenue to reimburse local governments for personal property tax reforms that have been enacted. But a major reason for the downgrades also relates to some uncertainty over business tax credit claims under the old Michigan business tax. And this chart illustrates how those projections have changed from the last May forecast to the more recent January 2015 forecast. The Michigan business tax is now repealed. It's been replaced by a new corporate income tax, but some businesses can still elect to file under the Michigan business tax in order to claim refundable credits that they still have a legal right to claim, and that leads to an outflow of revenues because we're now refunding money to businesses who are owed these credits. The problem in recent years is we're not always sure if and when these credits will actually be claimed. And as you can see, the more recent forecast from January led to some significant revisions in the outflow of revenue for these credits. Just quickly, for fiscal year 2014, the outflow is about $170 million greater than we anticipated last May. For fiscal year 2015, you'll see that gap is about $250 million, and the increase from May to January for fiscal year 2016 is about $350 million. So fairly significant differences, as we found more claims will be going out than were originally anticipated. So with that background on revenue, let's take a look at the current budget situation. And as we'll see, these recent revenue downgrades have resulted in a budget shortfall for fiscal year 2015. This chart provides a quick snapshot of general fund, general purpose revenues and expenditures, both before the January consensus, so in the left side of the chart, and then after the January consensus with revised revenue numbers. As you'll see at the left side, pre-consensus numbers, we were anticipating that fiscal year 2014 would close with slightly over $600 million ending balance in general fund, general purpose revenues to carry forward into fiscal year 2015, and with revenues and projected expenditures for 15, it was expected that a smaller but still positive balance would remain at the close of fiscal year 2015. The only numbers that changed to the right side of the screen now are those consensus revenue estimates, which were downgraded because of some of the business tax credit issues and other issues. And as you see, those dramatically affect our position in the general fund, general purpose account. Instead of a $600 million balance, that balance is eaten up in fiscal year 2014 and falls to about just over $300 million, so half as much as we anticipated. And then, most significantly in fiscal year 2015, the lower revenue estimates put us into a shortfall position, where if nothing else is done, we would have roughly a $530 million deficit for fiscal year 2015. Now, the Michigan Constitution requires us to have a balanced budget, and it also requires the executive to take action when revenues and expenditures becomes apparent they will be out of balance. And so the governor was required, even before introducing a fiscal year 2016 budget proposal, to deal with this fiscal year 2015 shortfall. And the governor did that first through an executive order. So along with the fiscal year 2016 budget proposal, the governor issued Executive Order 2015-5, and that executive order called for $102.9 million in general fund reductions across various state departments and agencies. At the bottom of this slide, we list some of the major, larger reductions in the executive order package, although it was quite extensive, lots of smaller reductions across many different agencies. But it gives you a flavor of the type of reductions that were included, and they really represent a mix of some funding that was being unused in the first place, some savings that have been generated in the budget in fiscal year 2014, and then also some true program cuts. One of the larger cuts was $16 million in general fund for disaster reserve funding to help with anticipated costs of recovering from some natural disasters last year. That $16 million represents lapsed funds, so funds that weren't going to be needed, and so they could be eliminated from the budget without having any real substantive effect. Similarly, corrections, there was an $8.5 million cut in both correctional facility and food service line items, and those represent savings that were achieved even in the fiscal year 2014 budget and are being carried forward into fiscal year 2015. There were some policy changes though as well, so I guess real policy reductions that occurred. Adoption subsidies was another large reduction, and that's an example of one of those policy-related reductions. $6.5 million will be reduced. We'll talk about this a little more later in the budget because this affects fiscal year 2016 as well, but basically this reflects a reduction in funding that will limit the ability of families that adopt children out of the child welfare system to get a renegotiated, redetermined rate if, for instance, the child, if some special needs are found in the child that weren't known at the time of the adoption finalization. Similarly, there was cuts to funding for state trooper schools and motor carrier schools in the Department of State Police budget. That'll be a real delay and reduction in Sorry, we're seeing a quick delay here. Technical problem. That'll be a delay and a reduction in the funding for those schools. And another example, hospital graduate medical education funding to support hospitals that support residency programs. That'll be a real reduction. The governor, however, is proposing to backfill that with some other restricted funding. The other piece of the reduction proposal, however, and a much greater piece, was a negative supplemental request, and this was a $443 million reduction to achieve additional GP savings and completely fill then the budget hole that we just discussed. Much of this, the largest components of the supplemental, were fund shifts. About almost $217 million were fund shifts, which means that things that used to be funded with general purpose revenue are now being funded with something else. And as I note here, about $171 million of that fund shift, it represents a shift in burden from the general fund to the school aid fund. Other major cuts: Medicaid caseload savings. So fortunately for the state, Medicaid caseload costs have fallen. That $100 million is, again, just reflecting those reduced costs. There's an $80 million cut in an intended payment towards the MIPSR's teacher retirement system liabilities that was to come out of the general fund that will be eliminated. State Building Authority was another another major cut. This again represents lapsed revenue that wasn't needed in fiscal year 2014, and again is anticipated not to be used in fiscal year 2015. The state film incentives were cut by $12 million out of a $50 million base. That'll be a temporary cut for fiscal year 2015. Everything else just adds up to about $16 million spread across many different budget areas. So you see the major pieces of the supplemental represent fund shifts and funds that were not being used for actual services. So to put the budget reductions in perspective, it's helpful to try to compare apples to apples across fiscal year 2014 and 2015. Originally, before any of the budget reductions were implemented, year-to-date general fund appropriations for fiscal year 2015 were scheduled to go up by about 5.7% over fiscal year 2014 levels. When you take those appropriation adjustments we just discussed, it basically completely eliminates the growth in those appropriations. It returns general fund appropriations for fiscal year 2015 back to those fiscal year 2014 levels. But in terms of the budget pain that these would achieve, that calls for looking at it a little differently, because as we saw, first in fiscal year 2014, there were significant lapses, so basically appropriations that were unused. Looked at the CAFR, and those amounted to almost $235 million. And then the other piece of that is, as we saw, a good chunk of the budget cutting was actually not cuts to appropriations, but fund shifts to appropriations, shifting general fund financing to financing from some other restricted source. So if you make those adjustments and look at the available budget, you'll see that the fiscal year 2014 general fund available budget really still goes up by about 4.8%, and I think the key takeaway from this is much of the budget pain from these budget reductions was either, one, achieved in fiscal year 2014 because it was those were funds that were unused last fiscal year, and two, we've achieved significant savings from shifting general fund to other state restricted funds. So with that background on the fiscal year 2015 reductions, let's turn to the fiscal year 2016 proposal for the upcoming fiscal year. Just in summary, a quick summary of the proposal for fiscal year 2015 from current law, the 2016 budget compared to current law, 2015 appropriations. Overall, the budget, which is about $53 billion in total, goes up by about 1.3%, and you see that general fund, general purpose, discretionary budget goes down significantly. And it should be noted, the $636 million cut from current law is actually slightly greater than the fiscal year 2015 budget reduction. So the governor's 2016 recommendation continues to show spending constraint on the general fund, general purpose sides compared to prior budgets, going even slightly further than the budget cutting that was done in the fiscal year 2015 proposals. Looking at the big picture, the combined fiscal year 2015 reductions in the executive order and negative supplementals, along with further general fund constraint in fiscal year 2016, have helped to restore balance to the budget. We have small GP balances projected for both fiscal year 2015 and fiscal year 2016, and most significantly, for 2016, note that spending and revenues are now in line again. In prior years, we've been spending more than the revenues and drawing upon, basically leaning on that general fund balance to help fund the budget. The governor's proposal for fiscal year 2016 has adjusted revenues of about $9.6 billion and baseline expenditures of just under $9.6 billion. So with that big picture overview, we do now want to turn to some highlights of the governor's budget proposal, and we're going to start with education. And I am going to turn the mic over to my colleague, Craig Thiel, who will go over those education highlights. Craig.
Thanks, Bob. This portion of our webinar is going to focus in on the K-12 school aid budget, as well as the appropriations to higher education, the 15 public universities, and scholarships and financial aid, as well as support for public community colleges. It's a fairly high-level review and analysis. We're going to look at the major spending changes from the current year, as well as any shifts that we've identified in the policy direction that the governor wants to take, including where there might be recommendations for new programs. So with that, I'm going to start out with the K-12 budget, school aid. At a really high level, this is basically a continuation budget, a total increase of less than 1%. Ongoing spending tops out at about $13.8 billion, but the governor has pared back significantly the amount of one-time spending items from the current year to just about $115 million. So when we look at ongoing spending, we're talking about the foundation grant, funding for special education, and the state share of the retirement contributions to the Michigan Public School Employees Retirement System, also known as MIPSERS, which I'll be talking about in some detail later. As is the case with the school aid budget each year, the devil of the governor's proposal, the devil of the proposal is often in the details. We've decided to focus in on a handful of issues. This is more a function of time as opposed to what may or may not be important. But in terms of the big areas this year in the recommendation, we're going to look at the foundation increase, what's going on with MIPSER's contributions, both for the current year and in the near future. There's a sizable increase in at-risk funding. The governor's recommended 2 new initiatives that we're going to talk about, a third grade reading initiative as well as increased focus on career technical education. He's also recommending additional funding for financially distressed districts, as well as some new oversight and reporting requirements in the budget. And finally, I just want to point out that as part of the solution to the state's general fund challenges, support for K-12 through the general fund has decreased significantly in this proposal. Again, the general fund's usually been used to kind of to top off the school aid appropriations, and this year it's been reduced by about $70 million. So if we look at the foundation grant, this is the per pupil allocation that districts receive set annually by the budget. There's a small increase, across the board increase of $75. It represents about a 1% increase over the foundation increase at the minimum grant level. This year, that grant is $7,200 approximately. It'll go up to about $7,300 next year. Last year, districts received a $50 per pupil across the board increase, plus those at the bottom received a one-time $125 equity payment. So last year, the effective increase at the lowest grant level was $175. The proposal this year recognizes that equity payment as a permanent piece of the foundation, so it's rolled that $125 payment into the lowest grant amount, and then adds $75. It's noteworthy that this is the fourth consecutive increase in the grant. However, it is the smallest when you factor in last year's equity payment. Also of note, because of the across-the-board nature of the proposed increase, there still remains a approximately $850 per pupil spread between the minimum grant and the basic grant, or the grant which is holding districts harmless. This $75 increase, however, is going to be eaten into to some degree by funding reductions in other areas of the K-12 budget. The governor's recommending the elimination of the performance funding allocation, which provided some districts up to $100 per pupil for hitting certain achievement levels on state standardized tests. While few districts received the full amount, many received some portion of this performance funding, so that's going to eat into the $75. And then the governor's also recommending the reduction in the best practices funding. This provided districts, nearly all of the districts, with a $50 per pupil allocation. These dollars were treated no differently than the foundation dollars. For 2016, with the reduction in total funding, it looks like districts will be eligible for about $20 per pupil, so a reduction of $30 per pupil from last year's allocation. The criteria are also changed. The criteria for qualifying for these payments have changed substantially in the budget. Districts are now required to meet 2 of 3 conditions in each of 2 broad categories, a financial category as well as an academic category. Depending on how districts fared with the best practices and performance funding, last year will largely determine what the effect of these reductions in tandem with the $75 increase, how that affects their bottom line. Something to note that's not addressed in the governor's budget, but it will significantly affect the overall funding level for school districts, not just the per pupil allocation, is what's happening with enrollment in the state. This has been an issue that CRC has written about and has discussed as a key ingredient in the financial picture for school districts. State enrollment is going to decline another 1% next year, and that enrollment decline is going to be spread across the public school districts and public school academies across the state. Some districts will see increases, but many will see a decline in enrollment enrollment, and this will affect their total revenue base, as the total revenue base is a function of the per pupil allocation and the enrollment in the state. So the state continues to base its student enrollment on current year counts, basically requiring districts to recognize in their total revenue base the fact that they have fewer students year over year. So if we look at how the funding foundation increase and the best practices in performance funding kind of might affect different districts, this table's intended to show some example districts and how they might fare. Each of the districts in this table are getting the $75 across the board increase, but some districts are going to see that $75 eaten into through the reduction of the best practices. So that's the $30 reduction I talked about earlier, and then the performance funding. Some districts receive the full amount, $100 per pupil. Some received none, and then a number of districts received some amount in between there. And so if we look how this nets out, the $75 per pupil increase could be completely eliminated if you were a district that was receiving $100 in the performance funding and the $30 reduction in best practices. It can be slightly eaten into if you were just receiving the best practices funding. Based on the number of districts that qualified for the performance funding last year, it looks like a few districts, in this case that look like District A and District B, will actually see their $75 foundation grant eaten into entirely. But most, the vast majority, will just see a portion of that grant eaten into, and that's what the number of districts down at the bottom are reflecting. Okay, I understand we've been having some sound issues with the webinar, and we appreciate the comments we've received. We don't know if that's a function of the technology we're using or my position, the position of the mic on my headset. So if there's any further problems, let us know, and we'll try to address them. I want to move now to another area of the budget that's important in terms of K-12 funding, and that's the retirement contributions. As a result of the reforms to the state-run public school employees retirement system, employer contributions for unfunded liabilities are capped at 20.96% of the covered payroll. And since 2013, the state has been making a payment to meet the required contribution above this cap. The payment comes from the school aid fund. In effect, it's an off-the-top allocation of the school aid fund. So instead of providing these resources to districts through the foundation grant and asking them to make the full payment to the retirement system for the unfunded liabilities, the state's making the payment directly. For 2016, the state payment increases by another $219 million. This brings the total to almost $900 million. This is equivalent to about a 10.5 percentage point hit or contribution of the payroll base, or about $640 per pupil on average. Because of the way these payments are made by the state, the effective savings to each district is going to vary, and it's going to be based on their payroll. Why is this payment going up? Well, the retirement system experienced increased liabilities as a result of the market collapse in 2008, 2009, and although those investment losses didn't meet actuarial assumptions, and the state was able to smooth those losses over a 5-year period. We're still seeing those losses kind of work their way through this 5-year smoothing period. So we anticipate, the state anticipates that there'll be another increase next year, much smaller, but still an increase in this contribution before the amount of state contributions kind of level off. Also, in terms of retirement funding, there's a $100 million appropriation this year, which is going to be continued next year in the governor's plan to help districts meet their share of the retirement contribution. This amounts to about a $70 per pupil contribution. So if we look at the effect of these retirement costs on per pupil funding, I've taken the last 6 years and put it in this graph to show how retirement contributions and the foundation grant kind of intersect. It divides the per pupil funding into 3 parts. This is the state share of the MIPSR's contribution. That's the dark blue piece at the top. That's the piece that's increasing in size each of the last 5 years. Then the share of the MIPSR's contribution that districts are responsible for paying. This is coming out of their foundation grant, basically. And then the third piece, the largest piece, is the amount of the foundation grant that's left over. Basically, the amount of funding that's available for school operations. In 2016, a district receiving the minimum grant will have just over $6,000 to spend on hiring teachers, heating buildings, buying books, and all other operational expenses. In other words, about $1,300 of the district's per pupil grant must be spent on satisfying the retirement obligations. This is both the normal costs for current employees, those contributions, as well as the district's share of the unfunded liabilities. All told, if we look at what's happened with the state share contribution to retirement, it's about $2,000 per pupil in 2016 between the contribution the state's making as well as the employer's contribution. So there's about $8,000 in total available on a per pupil basis, but $2,000 of that is being used to meet the retirement obligations. Over time, if we look back to fiscal year 2012, we've seen per pupil funding associated with the foundation grant rise from about $6,900, $6,946 to almost $8,000. That's a $1,000 per pupil increase. However, almost 60% of this has been to meet the growing MIPSR's obligations. Over that period, the discretionary funding to districts through the foundation has risen just about $400. So I want to now look at a few areas where the governor is recommending some sizable increases in funding. The first one is in the at-risk funding area. This is a categorical that districts receive based on the number of students that are eligible for free lunch. This is a sizable increase of about 30% over last year's allocation, and it's notable that it's the first increase in over a decade for this program. Because of the stagnant funding over time and the growing eligible population, there's been a significant prorating of the per pupil allocation. Under the law, districts are eligible to receive up to 11.5% of the foundation, their foundation grant for each eligible student. So for a district receiving the minimum grant last year, that amounted to about $820 per student. However, because of the pro-rate rating that had to take place, districts were receiving just over $500, about two-thirds of the maximum amount allowed. It's worth noting that there could be an additional $41 million available in the current year for this program that would be triggered if the May 5th road funding ballot question is approved. There was a tie bar to some legislation last year that would provide another $41 million for this program should that pass. Another area where the governor is recommending increased funding is in a third grade reading initiative. The governor has set this as a goal that children are reading at grade level by the end of third grade. Specifically, he wants Michigan to be in the top 10 most improved states in fourth grade reading as measured on the national assessment by 2019, and then to be a top 10 state overall in fourth grade proficiency by 2025. To get there, he's recommending a multifaceted approach that relies on a number of components: parent education pilot program, professional development for district personnel, development of some diagnostic tools to identify challenges for children in grades K through 3, and then most significantly, grants to districts to provide additional instructional time to K through 3 students. It's worth pointing out at least where Michigan ranks when it comes to fourth grade reading proficiency rates. Michigan, only about 31% of Michigan fourth graders are proficient in reading. When we look at the NAEP scores over time, this is worse than where the state was 10 years ago. So clearly we've lost ground in this metric, and the governor wants to focus in on this as a tool that kids will definitely need as they continue through their K-12 experience. As I mentioned, the governor is recommending a number of new initiatives to kind of tackle this problem. He is not at this time recommending holding back or retaining kids that aren't showing proficiency at the third grade reading level. This was a policy that was pursued during the last legislative session, but didn't make its way to the governor's desk. I suspect that it'll be another discussion point with this new legislative body, and possibly wrapped in with this budget proposal. Another area where the governor is recommending a substantial increase in funding has to do with career and technical education. In addition to funding increases in the school aid budget, he's calling for other related investments in other areas of the budget related to career and tech ed. Specifically in the K-12 budget, he's recommending about $18 million to expand the career technical education middle colleges program. These are programs that are designed at the local level to largely address local needs, employer needs, workforce needs. The programs are designed to allow high school students to obtain a high school diploma and another credential, such as an associate's degree or a certificate, in 5 years. Classes are generally taught on a college campus or at a high school, but by an adjunct professor. Historically, if these programs existed, the foundation grant was used to finance the coursework, and nothing would prevent districts from using the foundation grant again for this program. However, the proposal uses the funding that's being recommended to offset some of the foundation costs that have been used, or foundation funding that's been used to fund these. Basically, the additional money is being used to address the financial disincentive that maybe districts faced when they were considering participating in these programs. The way the proposal is set up, districts would be able to receive about 50% of the cost of supplying these courses through this state allocation. The other 50% would come through the foundation grant. And another area of the budget that's is going to see significant increase is resources as well as technical assistance for financially distressed school districts. The governor is recommending, again, the development of these interagency teams, Treasury and Department of Ed, to help identify those districts that are flagging financially that might be in need of additional technical assistance. The governor has recommended a $75 million distressed district rehabilitation fund where districts can make requests to the Department of Ed and then the Department of Treasury for assistance in solving their financial problems. Not much in terms of details on this at this point, but this is a sizable increase over a $4 million appropriation from last year. The early warning legislation that didn't make it out of the legislature last year is contemplated again in this budget proposal. The governor's recommending the development of an early warning system. This would be something that Treasury works on and probably most likely takes the lead with. It's important to note that the state has been largely searching for a policy to deal with financially strapped districts. In some cases, it's gone the emergency manager route. In other cases, it's looked to dissolving school districts. Last year, the governor was hoping that the early warning legislation and some of the proposals in the school aid budget would help articulate this policy direction. The legislature didn't sign off on this. At a minimum, the proposal that the governor's putting forth would help put forward a little bit of a consistent policy for how we're going to deal with these districts on a going forward basis. Now, real quickly, I just want to hit the highlights with the higher education budget. Largely an inflationary increase for the 15 public universities. The additional funding that the governor's recommending would be distributed through the performance funding formula that's been used the last few years. When you run the numbers through those metrics, individual school increases range from about 0.6% to 4%. The governor's also asking universities to cap tuition at 2.8% over the 2015 level. This is more than expected inflation, but it is below what the cap was last year when it was about 3.2%. The governor's recommending that the 7 universities that participate in the public school employees retirement system be brought in under a new retirement contribution cap. So there's some additional funding in the budget for the state to pick up some of the retirement contributions that those schools were paying. Those schools were left out of the reforms that took place in 2012, capping the employer rate. And most notably, the appropriation to higher ed continues the use of the school aid fund as a financing source. The proposal doesn't reflect the May 5th ballot language, which would prevent the school aid fund from being used for higher education. So if we look back and see what's happened with university funding, going back to 2002, both in real and inflation-adjusted terms as well as nominal, funding's down considerably. After the sizable cut in 2011, funding increases has brought the level of state support up, but still about 4% shy of where they were in 2011. The state would need to contribute about $60 million additional to fully erase the cuts from 2012. On an inflation-adjusted basis, funding is down much more than that from 2011, about $140 million. So this proposal helps restore some of that funding cut, but from 2012, but is still short by about 4%. And then quickly on to community colleges, there's a small increase for community colleges, basically an inflationary increase of about 1.4%, again used or distributed through the performance funding formula. Individual school increases range from about 1.2% to 1.9%. The states also, because of the employer cap for retirement, is increased about $17 million. One new program in the community college budget that the governor's recommending is to revive a program that's kind of laid dormant for a while. This is a scholarship program targeting need-based, or targeting needy students, adult students who are attending community colleges. He's recommending $6 million for this. And then the school aid fund continues to pick up about $230 million of the overall community college appropriation. And I just want to end with a look back at what's happened with general fund support of K-12, as well as the sharing of or stretching of the school aid fund. This chart shows two things. First, it shows the general fund support for school aid. Again, the general fund is usually been used just to top off the appropriations to K-12 districts. And as we see, after spiking in 2013, 2014, they've been pared back considerably, largely to address the general fund shortfall in 2015 and 2016. But at the same time, we've seen an expansion in the use of the school aid fund. This began with Governor Snyder's first budget and has basically stayed relatively constant the last 4 years, and is being recommended again in 2016. We see about $700 million this year being used to support programs that were previously funded from the general fund. The largest of these are the community college appropriation as well as higher ed. So when we add the reduction in general fund support to school aid with the stretching of the school aid dollars, these recommend effectively reductions in resources that were previously earmarked for schools that are no longer going to schools. And with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to Bob.
Thank you, Craig. And we are going to wrap up the budget webinar with highlights from the general non-educational sections of the budget. And we're going to start with local revenue sharing. The local revenue sharing payments recommended by the governor for fiscal year 2016 will go up for cities, villages, and townships primarily due to an increase in constitutionally dedicated revenue sharing payments. There's a sales tax, constitutional sales tax allocation of 15% to cities, villages, and townships for revenue sharing. Based on that sales tax revenue, those are projected to go up by 3.1%. And add an additional almost $24 million for constitutional revenue sharing payments. The other segment, the discretionary statutory revenue sharing payments, will be maintained at their fiscal year 2015 levels. In terms of the ongoing support, there was the elimination of $5.8 million in discretionary one-time payments to cities, villages, and townships, and another $3 million specifically earmarked to financially distressed cities, villages, and townships that will be discontinued. So for those, that subset of cities, villages, and townships that received some of that allocation, and we'll kind of review that in the next slide, they will actually see a decrease from fiscal year 2015 to fiscal year 2016. County revenue sharing is up 1.7%. That's primarily due to 2 new counties that are coming back online for standard revenue sharing payments and out of the reserve fund process that some counties are still on. So generally, county revenue sharing on a county-by-county basis will be flat for fiscal year 2016. This next slide just gives you a quick illustration of what the changes to revenue sharing mean to certain cities, villages, and townships, and I just picked out a few random examples to look at different subsets of municipalities and how they're impacted. Midland Township is the example I chose. Most communities fall into this category with Midland Township. They get constitutional revenue sharing, but no longer get any cut of the discretionary statutory revenue sharing pool, and that's the majority of cities, villages, and townships today. For those communities like Midland Township, they got a 3.5% increase in 2015 from the sales tax growth and constitutional revenue sharing. They'll get another increase closer to 3.1% in fiscal year 2016 due to that same constitutional growth. Another subset of communities, a smaller subset, continue to get discretionary revenue sharing payments based on discretionary appropriations. The city of Clare is an example of that community. Because they get both constitutional and discretionary, their revenue sharing payments from a larger base that includes the discretionary payment would have went up slightly less in fiscal year 2015 because both the constitutional, but both the constitutional and discretionary segments went up, so a 3.4% increase in 15. Their increase will be smaller for fiscal year 2016. They get a boost in the constitutional, but that discretionary segment remains flat. So for the city of Clare, their fiscal year 2016 payment will go up closer to 2.4%, and that will be roughly the percentage for a lot of the communities that are in that same boat. Then there are other communities, and there's probably just over 100 communities, cities, villages, and townships that are similar to East Bay Township in Grand Traverse County. These are the communities that received a special earmark, the one-time earmark in fiscal year 2015 to add to their constitutional portion. So East Bay Township got their 3.5% growth in fiscal year 2015 and then got a special one-time payment from a special category of discretionary appropriations. Those go away. So for East Bay and the other 100 or so communities in their same predicament, they will have gotten a significant one-time boost in fiscal year 2015, but their overall revenue sharing will actually shrink slightly in fiscal year 2016 with the elimination of that one-time funding. Other areas of the budget, in community health, there was a combination of both program enhancements and reductions in the community health budget. One significant reduction was a cut in Medicaid reimbursement for laboratory services. These are paid by Medicaid HMOs. Reimbursement rates will fall from the Medicare rate to the lower Medicaid fee-for-service rate. And since the HMOs are saving in reimbursing for these lab services, the state will save in terms of the per month, the monthly fixed rate that they will pay the HMOs as well, and that's expected to achieve about $32 million in total savings, about $11 million in general fund savings. That budget also includes several enhancements, in particular Healthy Kids Dental, which is a managed care dental program, will be expanded for younger children up to age 8 in the final 3 counties to which coverage under this program hasn't yet reached: Wayne, Oakland, and Kent, 3 of the largest counties in the state. Further, there is a proposal to cover up to 600,000 low-income adults under Medicaid dental at a cost of about $8 million general fund, $23 million overall. Also an expansion of coverage for autism services, and that will include one-time service capacity grants to 5 different Michigan universities to try to expand the capacity of providers to provide services to autistic children in the state. Other reductions in the budget include reductions to special hospital payments targeting graduate medical education and small rural hospitals. GF savings that will be achieved here, the governor is proposing to offset with shifts to hospital provider taxes. So the governor will propose offsetting provider tax rate increases to help restore those cuts to GME and the rural hospital allotment. Another significant piece within that primarily affects the community health and Medicaid budget is the health insurance claims assessment. The governor is proposing legislative changes to help save general fund, general purpose revenues in the community health budget. The HICA, as it's often referred to, is assessed on paid claims made by health insurers, by third-party administrators, and by self-insured medical insurance entities. The governor is proposing 2 changes beginning in fiscal year 2016. That would increase the current rate for this assessment from 0.75% to 1.3%, and also a legislative change that would eliminate the cap that's currently in place on combined revenues from the HICA and also a separate Medicaid managed care use tax tax rate. By eliminating the cap and increasing that the HICA tax rate, there's an anticipated addition of $180 million in revenue, and the governor's proposing using that to offset general fund, general purpose revenue in the fiscal year 2016 community health budget. There are some proposed reductions in the human services budget affecting child welfare in the child welfare areas. The governor is proposing to eliminate a $3 daily rate increase for private child care placing agencies that's been instilled over the past several budget cycles, as well as a rate increase for private residential providers of foster care services. Combined, that saves roughly $8.8 million general fund dollars in the current budget. In both cases, parts of those rate increases were tied to greater state cost sharing for these administrative services. Typically, these are shared between the state and the counties, but there were concerns about raising these administrative rates, imposing new local county funding burdens. So the state was taking on the full share of some of these increases, and that was the governor expressed an intent to go back to the old 50-50 cost-sharing, county-state cost-sharing nature of these services, if indeed these funding increases were to be provided. Another reduction that we discussed earlier, because it was also part of the 2015 reductions, was reduced funding for adoption subsidy redeterminations. When families adopt children out of the child welfare system that have defined special needs, they can receive a permanent adoption subsidy from the state to help fund the cost of raising those children. At times, new special medical or psychological service needs may develop, and those families can go back and get a redetermination to increase and boost their adoption subsidy. The budget proposal is proposing limits on those types of redeterminations to achieve some general fund savings equivalent to about $6.5 million in general fund. One of the proposed expansions in the budget has to do with, relates to the Child Development and Care Program, which provides child care subsidies to low-income households. Significant new federal money will be allocated in the budget to make some policy changes to expand access to subsidies for low-income families by doing three things. First, ensuring that there would be continuous eligibility for subsidies for a 12-month period. Once a family is eligible, they'd continue to be eligible for 12 months regardless of income changes that might occur during that time that otherwise might cost them their eligibility. It also increases the exit income threshold, which currently sits at about 121% of the federal poverty level, up to 250% of the federal poverty level. Michigan is has a fairly low income threshold, so you have to be quite poor in order to receive a new case for child care subsidies. This basically on the back end ensures that if families are able to earn a little extra income, they don't get immediately removed from subsidy eligibility once income goes up a little bit. Both the 12-month and the exit income threshold will help keep families on subsidies for longer periods of time. And then finally, there's an increase in reimbursement rates for high-quality child care providers, as is determined by the state's quality rating system. We should note here, both the Citizens Research Council and public sector consultants recently released a report on early childhood policy options for legislators. That report's available on our website for folks that might be interested. These policy changes do sort of move in a direction that's consistent with some of the proposals from that CRC PSC study. Finally, some licensing staff are added as well. There have been some recent reporting on deficiencies in licensing staff levels. Additional federal funds are invested to hire to add 39 new consultant and manager positions for child care licensing. Transportation, the budget does not include any of the additional funding that might be generated through Prop 2015-1. Instead, the governor maintains general fund support in the transportation budget of $139 million. That would ensure the state's ability, even if the ballot proposal were to fail, of at least being able to draw down all available federal transportation aid. That subsidy is down from prior years, as you see at the chart at the bottom of the screen. General fund support directly and indirectly in 2014 equated to about $450 million. It dropped a little bit to $284 million in 2015. The fiscal year 2016 governor's proposal would maintain $139 million of general fund support. Of course, if the ballot initiative actually passes in May, that would contribute a significant amount of additional restricted revenue for roads, and it's likely that the transportation funding would be revisited then at that point. The governor also proposed a number of increases in restricted fee revenues. We've put together a short list here. I've seen since a couple of reports that suggest there may be a couple other fees that we've missed here, so we're going to probably double check our list to see which ones we might have missed. I've seen a higher number than the 12.9 million that we refer to here, but this is a quick highlights of our quick review of the governor's budget recommendation of a number of fee increases that have been proposed to help maintain restricted revenue finance programs. And then finally, the governor does propose some additional savings for future budget needs and future rainy days. The governor is proposing an additional $95 million deposit for fiscal year 2016 into the Budget Stabilization Fund. When you combine that with a planned deposit of $94 million in the current year, it's anticipated that the Budget Stabilization Fund balance will rise to about $610 million by the close of fiscal year 2016. That's about 2.8% of our combined general fund, school aid fund revenues, those major revenues that we discussed at the very opening of the webinar. Of note, one significant proposal that is not renewed for the past couple budget cycles, the governor has asked the legislature to bank half of the Medicaid expansion savings. When the Medicaid expansion took place, the additional upfront will be funded with federal funds. Those additional that additional Medicaid coverage to many low-income adults would basically help reduce the need for various state-funded programs, such as, for instance, mental health services, non-Medicaid mental health services. Persons may be using those services now with state funding that could now draw direct federal Medicaid funding. The governor was proposing setting aside half of those state savings from the expansion into a special health savings subfund, and that subfund would then be used to pay for in the future state contributions towards the Medicaid expansion that are going to begin in fiscal year 2017. The legislature has not concurred with that the past couple budget cycles, and in the fiscal year 2016 budget recommendation, the governor does not propose continuing to try to set aside those funds. So we're going to wrap up with a quick assessment of the proposal. As we discussed earlier, revenues and expenditures for fiscal year 2016 are back in line. The fiscal year 2015 shortfall is addressed in the governor's recommendations. However, there are some future budget pressures that are worth noting and may provide future challenges to our budget stability. Transportation funding is a key one. If the May ballot proposal fails, then you're going to go back to the drawing board on how to provide some type of permanent increase for transportation funding. A key question is, will the state then have to continue to invest general fund revenues in the roads? Again, the general fund contribution, as we just saw, is down significantly in the past several years. We have added anywhere from $300 to $450 million in general fund support. If the May ballot issue fails, you may need to revisit adding significant general fund support for roads once again to at least fill in the gap until a permanent road funding solution is found by the legislature, as they have to go back and revisit that issue. There's also indications from the federal government that our current managed care use tax may have to be discontinued. Michigan and several other states have imposed this special use tax specifically on Medicaid managed care entities to help raise general fund revenue restricted revenue that is used to offset general fund needs in the Medicaid budget. If and when that tax is discontinued, that's going to throw additional general fund needs in the Medicaid budget back at the state. And then finally, as we just discussed, state matching funds will begin to be required in fiscal year 2017 for the Medicaid expansion. Beginning January 1st of 2017, the state will begin to contribute a 5% share towards those costs, which are currently completely federally funded. That'll grow to 10% by 2020, and with that will come additional needs for state funding that will, we are projecting revenue growth, but each of these will provide some extra budget pressures in future rounds of budget negotiations. Finally, we wrap up then with an assessment. As we indicated, the budget reductions through the executive order and the proposed negative supplemental adjustments are significant to bring structural balance once again to the Michigan budget. But as we just discussed, there are future budget pressures that will continue to pose a challenge to the governor and to legislators down the road. And I think a key takeaway from our analysis of the budget is voter actions on that May ballot proposal regarding road funding as well as other sales tax issues will have big ramifications on the structural balance in either a positive or negative form. Failure of the ballot proposal would call for having to go back and revisit some elements of the budget pertaining specifically to road funding. So we thank you for your attendance today. We are going to move to some questions and answers. I am, excuse me for just a moment. Oh, being reminded to remind listeners today, the presentation and the recording of the webinar will be available on our website. So hope you enjoyed the live presentation. If you know friends and colleagues who may want to view an archived version of the presentation, it will be available today on our website. And we are going to go to questions and answers. And I'm going to take the first one. The question came in. You mentioned about the state film incentives, that they are reduced in the fiscal year 2015 budget cuts. What happens to them for fiscal year 2016? A good question. Recall we did talk about the $50 million allocated for film incentives in current law is reduced by $12 million in the budget reductions for fiscal year 2015. The governor is proposing restoring the full $50 million for fiscal year 2016. So the fiscal year 2016 budget after the one-time cut in fiscal year 2015, the film incentives will be completely restored to $50 million. The governor has signaled, though, that half of that $50 million, so about $25 million of the allocation for film incentives, is one time. So basically that's a signal that in his fiscal year 2017 recommendation, his intent is to reduce those by one-half, which would leave about $25 million remaining in the fiscal year 2017 budget. We'll see if, where the legislature moves in terms of discussions of those on the in their budget deliberations. I am going to, we have a question regarding foundation grants, and so I'm going to read this, and then I am going to shift this one over to Craig Thiel, who will provide a response. The governor's proposal calls for a straight $75 per pupil increase for all foundation grants. Last year, as well as in previous years, there was an effort to reduce the equity gap. Do you have an estimate what it would look like if the legislature were to use the $108 million recommended by the governor and distributed based on the traditional 2x formula? What would this do to the gap between the highest and lowest per pupil revenue districts? And I'm going to let Craig address that question.
Right. So the last year, as I mentioned in my presentation, there was an explicit attempt to kind of narrow this gap between the lowest and highest spending school districts, and that was through that $125 equity payment that was distributed just to those at the lowest end, basically bringing the bottom up. If you were to use the $108 million that the governor's targeted for the foundation increase this year, That would translate into and use the traditional 2x formula. That's a formula that provides 2 times the increase to those at the bottom spending districts as compared to those at the top. The lowest spending districts, instead of getting $75 per district, would get $82 per district per student, and those at the top would get $41. So the difference on a per pupil basis is significant, twice the amount. But in terms of narrowing the gap, it would really only change the gap by a few dollars. So that $850 per pupil gap between the highest and lowest would be reduced to just under $850 per pupil. We had another question. I hope that answers the question. Another one came in, asked, could you talk through anything recent with school bond loan qualification program, concerns you may have on the impact of the state budget? It seems to be growing. Right, so one issue I didn't talk about but is in the governor's proposal is a increase in the debt service on the state borrowing to meet school district demands for payments on bonds that the districts issue. Basically, this is a program that set up in the state constitution that requires the state to lend money to school districts to help them meet their debt service costs. This borrowing that school districts do is capped in statute at $1.8 billion. And because of increased borrowings in recent years, there's been a requirement that the state's debt service has gone up, and in this year it's going up by $17 million in the governor's proposal. The effect is that those $17 million are not available to distribute to school districts for other purposes, the foundation grant, categoricals like at-risk. So with the cap, however, of $1.8 billion and being right up under the cap now, unless the cap's raised, we should see the debt service basically leveling out on that program. However, there's been a push recently to in the legislature to remove that cap, modify that cap. If that takes place, then the state's exposure on this front could change. There was a question unrelated to our budget webinar, but about our May 5th ballot proposal. Bob and I are currently ballot proposal analysis. Bob and I are currently working on that, and we suspect that will be available by the end of the month. We'll be doing a separate webinar on that closer to the May 5th date, but the analysis will be available at the end of the month. And I'd suggest that you check back on our website or get on our mailing list for notification of new publications. Right. One other question came in having to do with school funding, asked about changes to sinking fund millages. Question was, in the past there's been legislation to modify the use of sinking fund millages. These are local taxes that school districts can seek approval from local voters on for purposes of covering certain expenses. It's been a push to expand the use for things like technology purchases as well as school bus purchases. The governor's position on sinking funds, and as articulated in the budget, really hasn't changed. The legislation hasn't found its way to his desk yet. If it does, I think we'd get a clear idea of where he stands on this. But as far as the budget, it really doesn't talk about this issue. I think barring any 11th hour question submittals, that's about it in terms of questions. I want to thank everybody for their participation in the webinar. And just to reiterate, the slides as well as a recording of this webinar will be up on our website later today. Feel free to share it with your networks and others that might be interested in this. If that's it, I'm going to sign off. Have a good day.